Welcome everyone. We have with us today Ashwini Asokan. Uh, she's one of the big names when it comes to the Indian tech startup ecosystem. She's the CEO and co-founder of its computer vision AI company called Match Street 10. Um, she's done extensive work in the retail sector, and she's one of the few people who take diversity and gender balance very seriously when it comes to building a company. So for the next 30 minutes, we'll be talking to her about her journey, about the larger tech ecosystem, the fundraising frenzy, and yeah, gender diversity, yeah, everything. I am the co-founder at Morning Context. I write and edit all things internet, and I guess let's just jump right in. Actually, for the viewers, just to take a larger overview and begin with that, everything that Mad Street Den is and everything that where the overall ecosystem today stands. Let's start with that, and let's start with your journey and parallelly how things have changed outside of your startup as well. Just a lay of the land.
Well, I think if a good place to start with the whole AI story is to try and understand where we are in that whole adoption cycle with AI. I think we've gone from early adopters to we're slowly inching up to the mainstream adoption phase. I would say we're literally on the climb as we speak, and we're probably about 3 to 4 years away from this being large scale mainstream. And the things that have changed in the last maybe 10 years that have allowed this kind of adoption to take place, everything from infrastructure, the way data is handled, data systems, right? We've seen large scale data tools. We've seen, companies actually investing in collecting and creating the right kind of data. And it's funny because everybody likes to use the words digital transformation like fairly loosely to indicate that companies are going online or becoming digital. But I think the most important part of this change really all comes down to data creation, data consumption. And while over the last decade there's been kind of a fairly heavy investment in this whole concept of big data, and everybody's really been investing in collecting data, systems to actually use the data and apply the data have been like not necessarily caught up to the same pace, right? And that is kind of what you're beginning to see happen post pandemic. Coming out of this pandemic, that's basically what we're seeing is people actually sitting up and saying, I can't just be collecting this, I've got to do something with this data. We got to become digital and not just collecting this data but actually using it in a way that will allow us to become data centric organizations. I think that is the biggest transition and kind of almost pace acceleration you're seeing in the market in the last, like, let's say 18 months. In the space of AI, I think, if I had to like break down the lay of the land in 3 points, on one hand, you're seeing large scale enterprise companies like ourselves kind of emerge where we are able to handle very complex computer vision or NLP based problems. We're able to apply those technology in a way that it can solve problems for companies on massive scale, right? We end up working with, multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies across the globe, and it's fantastic to watch them go through that enterprise-based transformation using AI, right, across. So that's one thing that's happening. On the other end of the spectrum, you're starting to see a lot of companies emerge that solve very vertical specific, very narrow problems using AI. I think this second trend is a pretty awesome one because, it's almost following the SaaS trajectory, for a lack of a better way to put it. But it's one of those things where AI that's built for specific problems can sometimes be like very, very, and there are markets, right? Like healthcare is a great example, radiology, like pharma. I think you're already finance, you're already starting to see several different industries, specific use cases kind of emerging with a massive TAM, right? So that's the second thing that we're beginning to see happen. And then the third thing we're seeing is actually the emergence of data tool-driven companies, right? Like AI tools, so that allow companies across the board to, with all of their employees, actually use these tools to solve problems, right? And these are the three types of companies we're seeing emerge in the market. And where is MSD in all of this? We're in the first category that I kind of laid out. We work with large scale enterprises to kind of transform them bottoms up using AI tools, using ready to use APIs. And our mission is to make every person across the globe an AI native. And that's been the mission of the company from the get-go. And we believe that people need to be a part of creating the AI, not just consuming it, just not consuming passively TikTok videos, but actually participating in deciding how AI gets applied, how the tools get used, and where the story really goes out, right? And that employees should not be passive consumers of AI. And so we're on a mission to make this happen with our general AI platform called Blox. And we serve enterprises across retail, education, healthcare, so we've taken a very horizontal approach to kind of making the platform work for several types of industries.
I want to pick retail from there. I looked at it a couple of years back, and I remember a bunch of people telling me that there is so much data with these companies, and they don't know what to do with it, to be honest. A bunch of them just end up sending you anniversary and birthday messages using your numbers, and that's where the story ends. You've done so much work with retail. What I want to know is, in terms of AI adoption, let's say, where do we stand right now, post-COVID? One where we stand and one where we're headed as well.
I think we've seen a very specific kind of change that's happened in retail. Two things have happened. One, companies have survived and companies have died. Those are broadly two categories of companies that we've watched in the last 18 months, right? Companies that have gone bankrupt, massive multi-billion-dollar companies that have gone bankrupt, and then companies that have come out of nowhere to become extremely successful, right? The difference between the two, which ones were able to move digital, which ones were not able to move their large-scale physical infrastructure, real estate kind of, and pivot toward digital only, right? So we've seen this kind of fallout of people who are going to survive and people who are basically dying or going to die. The folks who have survived, who are surviving, who continue to grow, can be split into a few different categories. One, guys who are just digital native because they're just starting out. And so this is why you're seeing the explosion of all things D2C. Everybody believes that they can go straight to the customer. And so they have their own storefronts, their own digital storefronts, their own digital assets that allow customers to form a direct relationship with these brands. So we've seen a massive kind of change happen there. Second category, everything around sustainability. Everybody's apparently sustainable right now, or investing in sustainability. I don't think it's a buzzword. There are lots of companies that, I just met a cork board using, D2C company that basically makes, leather goods using cork. And I was like, wow, like, I don't even know how to wrap my head around it, but I think the buyers have become more and more conscious about their choices, their value systems. We've been talking about millennials and Gen Z for a very long time, very, very strong value systems, and they kind of back brands and things they like that stand for something. It also ends up explaining things like secondhand goods and what's happening with the whole, reuse kind of retail market. There's a lot of exchange happening. Social commerce, you can't really ignore that. I think, it's become, I think it's such a buzzword right now. I absolutely am not a big fan of using those buzzwords, but it is, right? People are part of social systems, and there's a lot of exchange happening on that front in terms of connecting large networks of people. The point is that 75% of, let's just take one category, retail, right? 75% of all, fashion, 75% of all apparel sales happens online today, as of 2021. Like just take a moment to let the number sink in. But globally, the number for fashion-centric sales, 75% happens online today. And that's a pretty powerful number. It shows where shift is happening. If you start looking at pet foods, if you start looking at, cars, used cars, I mean, hello, like it's exploding in every single geo. I think we're at that point where, the companies that have successfully gone online, become digital, are doing a fantastic job. Where we are seeing investments continue, obviously in the space of AI and in the space of data. We're seeing, we work with a lot of companies where it's not just enough to look at what the customer is doing, right? It's important to understand, what is that car? It's a used car. Where did it have dents? What kinds of issues does this car have, right? And today you're deploying like hundreds of thousands of people in the field to go out there, do the inspection, do the checks, go and then come back. And then there's a pricing strategy. You got to sit down and do everything. Today is extremely laborious, time consuming. It takes time, and it's systems that have to match up. You're kind of getting data and collecting data at a exponential pace. It doesn't match the ability to actually use that data and do something about it. And that is where AI is starting to play a pretty significant role, is that the pace of data collection is so massive. You're getting data on thousands and thousands of cars with each of these companies on a daily basis in terms of what's available out there in the market, what's the state and condition of those things, what's happening with each of those cars. How do you organize this data? Like, there's just no way. So if you decide you want to go out there and determine pricing, you first need to see real time what's going on in that state from a demand and supply perspective. And you need data. You need data, and it can't lag. Today, it's a lagging indicator, right? Because people are, and it's by the time it flows through the systems and somebody gets to do something about, data like that, it takes a while. Where AI can help, right? One picture of an image, you can automatically tell what's going on with that car. You can figure out, what brand it is. You can instantly kind of triangulate between other states. You can come up with what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. We work with, one of South America's largest, retail marketplaces, like $40 billion company that pretty much runs all retail. It's like the Amazon of South America, logistics, payments, everything, right? And we're kind of managing sellers are uploading millions and millions of imagery across different types of categories every single day into their systems, right? Who's going through that? Who's wading through that? Who's knowing whether the people are uploading NSFW stuff? Like, what's in those images? Where does it go? Is it going to show up in the front end on the marketplace? There's no checks and balances, right? We've got AI there, vision there, that's basically constantly monitoring that and is deciding whether or not something gets through to the systems, right? And does it have the kind, you take healthcare industry, right? You take dental companies, you take skincare companies where doctors have to wait for pictures or for the patient to come through the system to kind of visit them, and then they have to process all that data. They have to go. The whole process takes weeks at a stretch, right? Take a picture of your teeth, take a picture of your skincare condition, send it up, have it diagnosed, have it immediately detected, and then kind of figure out what kind of diagnosis there is and things you need to do. Across the board, it doesn't matter which industry you pick, retail or non-retail. We live in a largely digital world today. I think it's not true that the data doesn't exist. The data is already out there. It's just that people don't know what to do with that data. And what we are seeing in the last 18 months is the deployment of more and more systems to actually put that data to use.
What are some of the examples of success here? Those who have deployed very successfully. You said it in the beginning. I didn't want to cut you off there. You said some died and some are basically thriving.
Success stories across the globe, I guess, right? Like you only have to go out there. I think in India here, we've got Tata Group. That is so fantastic stories of how AI is part of their very core platform across the globe. And it's not, you don't read about it every day in your news the same way. But, it's a fantastic story of how AI has been adopted across all brands in the Tata Group. If you look at, like I said, I was giving you the example of South America and Mercado Libre. I was giving you the, lots of companies. It doesn't matter, diesel in Italy, right? So many companies have kind of started to adopt, these practices. And there are many different ways of doing it, right? You can choose to work with developer tools, and you can choose to kind of have ML people in your own company kind of training this stuff and pushing it out. The downside to this, the upside to this, let's start with the upside. The upside to this is that everybody gets to move at their own pace, completely in control of their own data, right? The downside of this is it's not easy to push, AI into production. And there's model drift, and it fails. It doesn't scale with time. There's new data. What happens then? And so, so there's many different pros and cons to whether using tools or using ready-made APIs or working with large-scale enterprise systems. And I think every company, the nice thing about success stories that we're seeing in the market is that every company is finding its own niche and its own way to kind of, adopt it. And the question for us, of course, is, when does it become mainstream, right? And what becomes mainstream? And how do
That
companies
brings me,
grow?
yeah, that brings me to your business specifically. Last 18 months, if such a big shift is happening, how is your business looking?
Yeah, I mean, we rode the pandemic at that point. Every company was going online, and it was pretty fantastic for us. This is the period that we actually launched the horizontal play as well, because we started getting pretty extensive interest from across industries. Like I said, education, healthcare, entertainment, real estate, finance, insurance. Like we just started getting an overwhelming amount of kind of inbound from that space. And since we had architected the underlying platform to be generalizable to begin with, we have tools that have been embedded in there in our process that allow us to kind of bootstrap our AI systems with very little data, right? So where you needed millions of data points to actually make the system work today, we can make it work with like 100 data points. 100 images can do the job that, a million images used to do, and you can kind of deploy it, and the system is kind of in a self-learning loop as it starts to encounter a newer data, right? So it's been fantastic. I think largely due to the fact that companies all decided to go digital, and data started flowing, and they decided that they had to automate processes, and the story is really one of automation. I don't think there is a way out of this. And the more data you have, the more you have to automate. It's simple as that, because there is no way that any human large groups of people can even wade through that data. It is just humanly not possible to just sit and go through billions and billions of data points that every single company generates on any given day, right? So the automation is less about automating people's work out, and I think which is largely the narrative that you read out there. And it's more about setting in place processes and automation that uses the data so that the people can decide what to do about it, right? So that's kind of, I think where we are today versus say even 18 months ago.
That must have given a big boost to your non-retail portfolio.
It definitely did. Both retail and non-retail kind of grew multifold. I can't get into the nuances, but it was not the normal kind of growth. It was one of those years where we just went, skyrocketing on the multiples in terms of, the ability to generate revenue with a lot of the non-retail folks as well. And we continue to grow. I think part of the goal for us is it's less about sticking to one thing at this point. I think we've proven ourselves fairly well in the context of the retail industry, and now it's just all about scale across industries. And what is really interesting to us is taking the same systems, taking the same AI, and kind of putting it out there in the hands of like healthcare folks and dental folks and education folks and cars, people like selling cars. This is where we're seeing the most amount of excitement, is truly starting to inch towards this vision with which we started the company, which is to build a generalizable, a platform where the AI is more general and it's not just very specific. And we've always believed that it required architecting the platform and a combination of the right tools to be able to get there. And we're very happy that we did.
What are the next three big categories where you're seeing this adoption? We've heard from you of cars is say one, or auto is one, but what are the other two? Education?
Well, the thing about education is I think we're going to see, I mean, there are lots of jokes going around the education market in India, right? I mean, I think we've all seen those jokes.
Yeah.
But we don't believe that, we believe TAM-wise, education will cap out at some point. From a B2C standpoint, education looks very different than when you look at it through the lens of B2B. So we believe that it's going to be a significant difference there. I do think that AI is going to be play a massive role in the space of education, but we don't see, and we're going to continue to play there. Obviously, we already have a lot of companies that are working with us, but it's not going to be, I think, like the big thing for AI. It's going to be one of the things. It's not going to be the big thing. Finance, it's already, we think it's going to be one of the biggest things. You'll be surprised. I think it's funny every time I hear someone say, oh, but the fintech AI space is so crowded and it's there's so much going on. And then you go and you figure out and you go work with a fintech company and you're like, yeah, no, we are nowhere close to being, we were scratching the surface in terms of what AI can do. I do think it's a very competitive space, AI in finance, but we have a long way to go there, and that is one of the places we're betting. Second one is healthcare, of course. I think kind of usual suspects. Healthcare is again one of those things where, at least at this point, we're seeing more narrow focused companies focused on specific diseases, specific types of pharma, specific types of diagnoses that are kind of emerging rather than more generic ones. So that is of I think significant note. And then the last one, like I said, right, is going to be even within retail. Like we're seeing cars exploding, we're seeing like pet stuff exploding, we're seeing very home goods exploding. There are lots of categories there where we do think that commerce is going to there are specific categories in commerce that we believe will explode, right? And it's going to be less about the specific category, and it's going to be more about the values with which that brand stands for. Is it like sustainable vegan? Is it like used cars or whatever, or is it just somebody that's producing based on something, right? Some value that some. So we think that those are some of the big ones that we're seeing right now.
Sorry, let's talk about the ecosystem a little. What's your general view on the fundraising frenzy and the jaw-dropping valuations going around right now?
Hey, it's a demand and supply thing. That's what we're seeing. Clearly, there's a pretty fantastic group of people that, especially in Asia, I think the story is one of just second, third, fourth generation of entrepreneurs. That's probably what's going on. This has been coming. This has been coming for a good 15 years, right? And this is when it gets this way, when you have more and more and newer generations of people that get to build on stuff that's already been done in some form. Infrastructure is amazing. Everything is about UPI in India right now, right? And I think the funding frenzy is simply it works, given there are so many businesses to invest and there's more money than people starting companies at this point. And there's places needed to park the money, and hey, it's a great market for entrepreneurs. So it's kind of it, and it'll go in a cycle, right? Like this is just this part of the cycle. We're probably going to see the other part of the cycle in a couple of years. So
the more number of people I talk to, there is this popular opinion that it's tougher to build a company in a bull market. For you, who's servicing so many people with a lot of money, is it a big opportunity?
Yeah, there's opportunities everywhere at this point, right? Like I think everybody is going digital, which means I think what is happening right now is that there are entirely new categories of things that did not exist as recent as 5 years ago, right? We've been talking about social commerce for, I don't know, like 20 years now. Like,
Yeah.
But it's finally taken off. It's an entirely new category, and it's definitely not happening the way it was envisioned 20 years ago. I can tell you that much. I used to work in this space at Intel, and it didn't pan out. It's not panned out the way everybody envisioned it to be. And so, entirely new categories of things are coming up. Like nobody watches TV anymore. You try telling my kids, like, like if they ever spot an ad somewhere, I mean, they now know of ads because of YouTube ads, and they don't get the concept of, what do you mean I can't pause the TV? Like, what do you mean, right? So there's just entire categories that have been created, and so opportunities are everywhere, and startups are need to make use of that, right? But then what they say, emperor's new clothes, right? It's when all the jazz is done, I think we're going to see which are the most sustainable businesses that will stand the test of time. Whether it's a frothy market or a not so frothy market, businesses that do what they do will stay forever, right? So I don't think they'll take advantage of the markets that are there, but nothing is going to ever replace a steady state of a business just being run well.
I've been meaning to ask you this, and you and I spoke about this about 2 years ago, so I'm very curious to get an update. the gender imbalance when it comes to female founders, and female founders who have been funded. When we last spoke, I think there was a massive rise in the overall share of funding going towards startups that were led by women. I specifically remember you saying that women have to work 10x harder than their male counterparts to gain any sort of ground. We've seen Nika IPO recently, and has the needle moved in 2 years?
Yes and no. Yes, because just anecdotally, I can tell you I find more female founders per square mile, if that's the way to put it. As an angel investor myself, for me, I'm just stunned by the number of startups that come across my, email that are female founded in some way. So I do think that things are changing pretty drastically. From a funding perspective, no, not at all. I think the funding, if you see the numbers, has dropped down to 1.6, 1.7% for female founders this year. So I think it's been a particularly bloody year for female founders when it comes to funding. Yeah, so I think, so that's the yes and the no, right? I do think there's a record number of women who are founding companies, and VC fundable or VC funded companies specifically. Interestingly, most of them are in the seed stage. And I think, just like anything else, it's one of those things that just has to go through a few generations of iteration so that it starts to add up. The nice thing about the change is that I see the wheel in motion. I see it starting to add up. I definitely do. One can hope. One can hope. I am an eternal optimist, and I hope that things will change because they just have to.
How far along are we into breaking off that founder stereotype of a man in a hoodie with messy hair, a college dropout with a laptop and coding, sitting in a cafe?
Well, we haven't moved too far away from that, I must say. Unfortunately, I do think that in so many ways, I say this, right? In so many ways, I feel like Asia is just fantastic, just in terms of the talent we have, the kind of very nuanced version of the talent we have. It's very specific to our geo, it's very specific to the market conditions here, the way life happens here, the way culture is here. And I feel like we need to form our own identity in the coming years rather than trying to just simply replicate a Bay Area SF model of startup ecosystem. And it's what I think is lovely is that the companies that are being formed and the businesses that are being formed clearly represent a breakaway from replicate the SF company model, right? Like I think we're seeing a significant breakaway from that. I'm just going to make a clone, but an India version of that clone, right? Like I'm just going to make like an Indian HR company. I'm going to make an Indian, like it's not that. We're beginning to see very significantly different companies coming out of Asia that are not just replicas of the West. And so, I find particular pride in that, if I may. And I do think that, while the hoodie stuff is all, I think everybody loves to talk about that stuff, but I think the proof is in the kind of businesses that are being formed. And I think it's a really exciting time here.
Got it. I think we're almost out of time, so I want to touch upon this. You spoke about this new wave of niche startups that are coming up, and looking at you've very patiently built this company. What is the advice you want to leave the new people who are entering the space with?
The shine and the glam is seasonal, right? I sometimes worry that startups are becoming like Hollywood or Bollywood. It's all about like celebrities and I think we should be celebrated. Like entrepreneurs should be celebrated, founders should be celebrated. It's an amazing thing, but it's so hard to get on Twitter to just read normal stuff without seeing an 18-year-old show up and say like, I started a company yesterday. And I'm just like, oh my God, just go out and play. Like, I don't know, like kick at a ball, like go run. Like, I don't know, right? I just feel like there's sometimes a complete lack of perspective on what makes life tick at the end of the day. I think it's a big focus because, you know, it's not all shine and glam every day. And it might be today because, you know, hey, people around the world don't necessarily have places to park their money and they'd rather park it in your company. And that's fantastic for you, but that's not going to stay that way for a long time. So, you know, heads down executing is kind of where you really need to be. And you know, and I think Twitter is a great place for people to form their own identity, explore who they are, talk about, you know, the stuff they do. But like, you know, being 18 or 20 and then giving everybody gyan about like, you know, like what you like, how you know, how can you make money? Or I just feel like we're feeding a frenzy that might just come back to bite us in the behind. And so, you know, I would urge, you know, just a little bit of caution in terms of just being balanced about it and keeping your head on your shoulders.
All right. I think on that cautionary note, we can put a stop to this. Thank you so much for joining Ashwini and taking out the time for this. Thank you for everyone for thank you to everyone for tuning in, and yeah, we'll see you around.
Likewise, thanks for having me, Harveen.